Hello and welcome to the Marshall Assessment Introduction to the Technician Scientist Standard. In this short video, I'm going to talk to you about what the endpoint assessment looks like, the different assessment hurdles that you can expect. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the details of how to move and transition from your on-program development as an apprentice into your endpoint assessment window. And we'll have a look at the documents, support, and ultimately what the results might look like for you when you've completed your endpoint assessment. So at Marshall Assessment, we are a specialist scientific endpoint assessment organisation. We are regulated, like they all are, by two organisations in two slightly different ways. First of all of the apprenticeship standards that we assess are regulated themselves by a government arm's length organisation known as IFATE, which stands for the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education. So they look after the detail of the things that we assess. We would develop the assessment materials and make sure that we stay faithful to the processes and procedures laid out by IFATE. But in terms of external quality assurance, we are recognised as an endpoint assessment organisation by a body called Ofqual, as you can see there. So let's dive straight in and let's have a look at the all-important assessment plan and where you can find it. So effectively, if you go to the IFATE webpage and search up apprenticeship standards and put in technician scientist, you should see a page that looks very similar to this. This page should be able to give you all of the information about the occupational summary, what it is the technician scientist does. Very importantly, it will tell you about the knowledge, skills and behaviours, or KSBs, that you will need to develop at an up to and maybe beyond level 5 whilst you're on program and developing those knowledge, skills and behaviours. It will also detail any other things that you need to accomplish before you complete that course, including information about your endpoint assessment. So you can see there in the middle of the page in the light blue bar, there is an EPA plan. If you were to navigate to that site, click there, you'll be able to see all of the rules and processes that an endpoint assessment organisation must follow in order to effectively assess an apprenticeship candidate or an apprentice candidate at the end of their apprenticeship. Okay, so that's where I would definitely advise you go. Definitely have a look at your assessment plan. At Marshall Assessment, we've developed lots of different guides to support you whilst you're on program. So make sure, if you haven't got hold of them, ask your training provider to give you the guidance documents for the various different hurdles for this apprenticeship standard as well. You'll find them very, very useful when you're preparing for your endpoint assessment. Okay, so there is a little bit of abbreviations in the things that I talk about. So I just wanted to mention a few of the key terms. EPA, obviously a fairly straightforward one, endpoint assessment. I may well refer to IAs, or you may see it in our paperwork, our guidance documents. So that's the independent assessor, previously known as the external assurer, but they're the individuals that are going to be assessing you at the end of your program. TP for training provider, professional discussion is PD, and gateway, which we'll talk about in a moment. And then the EPA period or EPA window. That's where you get to prepare for your endpoint assessment, and obviously you need to take that. For this, I think the endpoint assessment window is 3 months. So that's how long you can expect to wait before you get your assessment completed. Okay, so let's start right at the start then. Your journey as a technician scientist should have started, or most commonly it does, with an initial assessment. So that's in English and maths. That's a requirement from Ofsted and Office for Students, that apprentices also develop their English and maths no matter what level they come in at. That we as training providers will also push them forwards. And there is a basic requirement that you need to have accomplished level 2, a grade at GCSE of A to C, or at least above 4, grade 4. And if not, then you've successfully completed a functional skills course and passed that in English and or maths. So that's right at the start. You'll also quite often be asked to assess yourself against the knowledge, skills and behaviours for the actual apprenticeship itself as a benchmark to assess where you are and what your growth looks like and how you might want or need to develop whilst you're on program. So the on-the-job training is what takes up most of the time whilst you're on program. You're developing skills with your employer every single day, and you're meeting regularly with your training provider, and they're also developing you, may well be giving you qualifications, as well as developing your knowledge and skills around the role of technician scientist and creating a portfolio of evidence to support you for that. So that portfolio of evidence within this standard is known as the competence evaluation log. So all that great rich evidence that you can come up with from work product, professional discussions, witness testimony, those kinds of things get stored away, and you will need that later on in your endpoint assessment. Quite commonly, the qualification that comes with this would be a level 5 HND or a foundation degree, something like that. In the newer versions of this standard, it isn't mandatory. In some of the older versions, it is still there. So if you've done that, that's great. If you haven't needed to, then fair enough, you don't need to do that. So we mentioned Gateway on the previous slide. Gateway is really the first main checkpoint where your endpoint assessment organization will get involved. So you've been on program for 33 months, perhaps. You've been creating an excellent competence evaluation log. You've completed your qualifications. You already have your English and maths. You feel like you're ready. You are working at least level 5 for all of those knowledge, skills and behaviour statements that you need to within this apprenticeship standard. You raise your hand and say, look, I'm ready. I think I'm done. Your training provider needs to agree. Your employer also needs to agree. And then they can contact us at Marshall Assessment, and we can start to process you to have completed your development. Your on program phase of your apprenticeship is complete. That basically means you need no new additional learning. You are the finished article. So you can move through the gateway into the assessment window and the assessment period. So here really is where it starts to get quite interesting in terms of assessment. So you will be assigned an independent assessor from Marshall Assessment. There are 2 distinct hurdles of assessment, 2 different types. The first one is the project presentation and questioning, and the second is your professional discussion, underpinned by that portfolio of evidence. So that's why it's so important to have a really good, strong portfolio that is linked really nicely back to the KSB criteria within the apprenticeship standard. And then finally, you complete, and all of that may well take around 36 months. So let's have a look in more detail at assessment hurdle number 1. So the project presentation and questioning section of your assessment. So there are a couple of things that you would need to do at Gateway, first of all, in order to make sure that your project is appropriate, and when you actually are being assessed, there is enough detail there and enough content in the right direction for there to be a good assessment for you. So it's important to submit your project title and scope, says their maximum of around 500 words, to Marshall Assessment at Gateway. So we will have a look at what your project plan is, the content of it, the scope of it, and the detail there within that small document. And what that will do is effectively satisfy us that if you carry out that project, once you move through Gateway, it will give you every opportunity to pass that hurdle. So we're just checking that before we move you through, that what you're planning on doing is going to be good enough for your endpoint assessment. So you can see it's an important checkpoint for us. So once you've gone through your Gateway, and that's confirmed, you need to complete your project report and submit that along with the presentation to us within 8 weeks. So it's important that you meet that deadline. If you are late for any reason, you could end up failing by not submitting it in on time. So if there are any blockages or any issues or any problems, do get in touch with us very, very quickly around that. So the independent assessor from Marshall will review your submitted report and the presentation, and they will assess that holistically against all the grading descriptors for that hurdle. So you can find the assessment criteria in our documents. Again, ask your training provider to supply you with those. And it's important that you understand what those assessment criteria are. So when you're writing your project, when you're creating your presentation, you know exactly how you're going to be assessed and what you're going to be assessed against. So although there are knowledge, skills and behaviour statements on the IFATE webpage, there is a different set of assessment criteria, obviously very closely linked, but not always exactly the same, within the endpoint assessment plan, the EPA plan. Okay, so once you have submitted that, you have your endpoint assessment date. It will be the shortest amount of time will be 2 weeks after you submit, but we'll agree that with you. You will then be able to complete your presentation, deliver that to us, and then there'll be questions that follow after that. So what that feels like on the day of your assessment, it will be a Teams call. So you will have that. It'll be recorded so that the assessor can go back to it when they're writing their notes, and all of that evidence is there for them to review. So you will present your presentation for 30 minutes. There will be a break of around 15 minutes maximum for the independent assessor to review your presentation against the questions that they have ready to be asked. So obviously they may change some of their questions, they may cross some of their questions out because you've already answered them during your presentation. So it will give them time to reflect on the presentation that you've delivered before moving into the 55 minutes of questioning afterwards. So all of those different pieces of evidence can be put forward to grade you against the assessment criteria in a holistic manner. So all of them are taken into account against the criteria for you. So that's good that you know that. It means you can focus on different criteria and different elements, knowing that everything will go towards your grade that you're doing. So in a bit more detail, and you can find some of this information again in the EPA plan and in the guidance documents. The project report submitted 3,000 words plus or minus 10%. That's excluding diagrams, appendices and references. It should be and needs to be submitted to us as a PDF, so we can't accidentally delete something or miss something or anything might happen. It's much more tricky to accidentally edit a PDF, so that's how it should come to us. And there should be a stated word count, and not be over or under the limits that you can see there on the page. So the report itself, the rules state within the assessment plan that it should include planning the investigation and the scientific experiment that you've chosen, prioritizing the tasks and the way you go about doing that, selection and review of scientific techniques, laboratory equipment that you're using, the collaboration with stakeholders, how the impact of work of others might be considered in the work that you're doing and how you've negotiated through that, scientific techniques, how you selected those to meet the objectives for your project, and how you've recorded the information and the results that go into your data analysis and interpretation. Once you've done all that, then there needs to be a summary of findings. So the report is presented in a very formal manner, and it's very specific to the project that you're doing, obviously, for your endpoint assessment. That's what it's about. And it needs to be meaningful, have impact for your employer, not something that is just entirely theoretical. So it does need to have impact. Okay, so let's just look quickly at one of the areas here, just as a way of example on how we kind of assess the work that you're creating. So this is the topic area of planning the workload. This, in terms of meeting expectation, this is where the individual applies the principles and procedures of project management individually or in a team, completing work to schedule in a compliance with internal and external requirements whilst remaining resilient under pressure. So in red there, you can see that we would suggest to meet expectations that the apprentice should provide examples to demonstrate how they've used the principles and procedures of project management, either individually or part of a team, when completing the project. So evidence that you have completed your work on time, complied with internal, external requirements, and evidence how you've remained resilient under other external pressures or actually internal pressures for the work that you're doing. To exceed expectations, the assessment plan would state that you need to identify potential opportunities for the work that you've carried out to add value to the project or the business beyond its original scope. So identify ways in which your project could have value beyond what you've already identified at the start. Obviously, when you finish something, you could then see other ways in which it might benefit your employer and other areas of that business potentially as well. So you need to reflect on things. You need to judge how impactful your project work could have been or the results could have been. So the project report, presentation and questions, when you actually come to that part of it for your presentation, you need to present for around 30 minutes. The rules of the assessment state anywhere between 20 and 40 minutes maximum. So if you aim for 30 minutes, then if you're a little bit short, you'll still be okay. And if you're slightly over, then again, you'll still be okay. But do practice that. Do get your timings right. Do get a good feel for how long it takes you to deliver your presentation. There won't be questions during it because that time is already catered for afterwards. But as I said before, once you've completed your presentation, there can be a maximum break that the independent assessor would ask for of 15 minutes. Again, that's good because it means that they can reflect on what you've said and then bring that forward to the questioning, whether they need to reduce the number of questions or they may just need to check and challenge something in a slightly different way. So the follow-up questions, they will last between 35 minutes and 55 minutes. That's what you can expect. And believe me, that time will fly by. Okay, so that's a bit of a look and feel for the first assessment hurdle. Why don't we have now move on and have a look at the professional discussion underpinned by portfolio of evidence, or assessment hurdle number 2. Okay, as the name suggests, this will be very much based on the portfolio of evidence that you've submitted at Gateway. We will be able to review that assessment portfolio, which allows us to contextualize the questions that we're asking. We can see the type of work that you're doing, the type of skills that you've learned, and get all of that kind of richness from your portfolio so that we can have a really good and directed conversation with you. The portfolio itself, as it states there, is not assessed. So for this particular assessment hurdle, the evidence is what you're saying. It's not the documents that you supply us with. Obviously, in the first hurdle, everything was holistic. In this one, it's all about what you're saying, how you're responding to questions on various different themes. So our assessor will lead that professional discussion. It will be one-to-one. Again, it will be on Teams. So it can be recorded. It will be referred back to by the independent assessor so they can make sure they've captured everything that you've said. So you can bring your prepared portfolio with you. If it's electronic and you want to access it, you can also do that if you wish to. My advice would be, like most portfolios tend to be quite large, particularly if you've been working on something for a couple of years or even longer. And in that case, what you really want to do is you want to prepare perhaps and print out some of the documents to support you. As you go through the assessment criteria within the assessment plan, there will be some criteria that you just know you'll be able to talk about quite easily, quite clearly. There may well be other features of the assessment plan for this hurdle that you feel a little bit less confident on remembering exactly what you want to say. So think about this hurdle not as a memory test, because it isn't. It's a knowledge test. It's what you know, how you work, what you do in your place of work, and why it's important to do it the way you do it. So you can take things with you, you can bring it in, and even if it's not in your portfolio of evidence, if there's other things that you want to rely on that you've used or created whilst you've been an apprentice, then you can use those as well. But again, my advice would be not to bring too much in, because you can waste a lot of time trying to find your examples to show or share with your independent assessor. So Because this is level 5, it will be the emphasis will be on you to respond to open questions, excuse me, to be full with your answers and to almost lead the conversation. So there'll be an opening question from each of the 4 themes being assessed, and we'll look at those in a moment, with follow-up questions also being asked. So you should aim to talk for around 15 minutes on each theme. And you know what the themes are in advance, you know what your evidence is, and you know what the assessment criteria look like. So this is where preparation is key if you want to do really well in this particular assessment hurdle. So the 4 themes: performing laboratory tasks, calibrate and using equipment, record keeping and communication, and continuous improvement. So quite often we get asked, how big should a portfolio of evidence be? Well, it doesn't need to be huge, and you can include pieces of evidence that cover 1, 2, or 3 different themes with different criteria, different assessment criteria covered in those. So around 15 discrete pieces of evidence is fine. It needs to be not too cumbersome if you're going to use it, clearly, but it doesn't need to be huge. Lots and lots of examples around the same criteria is not necessary. Remember, it's not being assessed, but it will allow your independent assessor to ask questions that are relevant to you, that apply to the type of work that you're doing, and that's got to be easier, and it's got to go in your favour. So the evidence sources could include workplace policies, standard operating procedures, records, witness testimonies and statements from individuals at work, photographs that have been contextualized or annotated by you. Video clips are okay. They're not always great because you can't rely on them, although we can review them. You might struggle to use them during your assessment. A maximum of 10 minutes, and it's really good practice to identify and log exactly when in that 10 minutes the actual point, the evidence is, where it clearly is. So you might talk for 10 minutes or have something that might be 8 minutes and 52 seconds when you start demonstrating or talking about a particular criteria. Reflective accounts, self-evaluations are not permitted. They're not evidence of you being able to do something. It's just evidence that you can write about something. So we need something which is tangible, which is valid and sufficient from you in order for you to use and to look at. Remember, you don't just have to use the examples within your portfolio. If there is another example that you want to use, that's absolutely fine. So don't feel that you have to, or in any way you're constricted by the examples within the portfolio that you submitted to us. Okay. So an example here of a topic area: calibrate and use equipment. So you'd need to justify the choice of instrumentation or laboratory equipment, maintenance, calibration techniques relevant to your role, provide examples using the instrumentation. How do you do that? How do you maintain it? Why is it important to calibrate? How have you done that? So going over to the exceeding expectations, evaluate the impact that maintenance has had. Does it have a link to an increased validity of results, more trust within the customer or internal clients around the results that you're creating? And what are the implications of that within your organization? So we talk about what you do, how you go about doing that, why is that important, and perhaps the consequences or benefits. So it's a little bit about what you do, how you do it, and the impact. That's really what you want to focus on when you're answering the questions. To build up a really good response around something, discuss and describe how you do it, the importance of doing it, the benefits and impact that has for you, for your colleagues, and ultimately for the client or the customer at the end of your work. And that really does come across nicely within the discussions that you would have. Okay, so moving on, not many slides to go here. So the professional discussion and the best way to prepare: ensure that you've got the familiarity in your own evidence, that when somebody talks about something, you know what it is, and have to hand anything that you feel like that you might need to lean upon. If you know that you know it, then obviously you might not need to print it. But if you have a particular block on something, or you feel that under pressure you might not be able to remember, that's a good thing for you to print out. You won't know that unless you've prepared, unless you've read through the criteria, you understand the process, and you know what is inside your portfolio of evidence. So prepare for an hour and 45 minutes. It's plus 10% to finish your last response. So no new questions will be asked after that, but you can have an extra few minutes there to finish a response at the end of that time. As we've said, it's over Teams in most cases. So that leads us on to the overall grading for the technician scientist standard. So there are obviously two hurdles that we've been discussing, and they are equally weighted, so 50% value for each of them. In order to not fail, you need to get meeting expectation or meets expectation in both of those hurdles. That will get you, as you can see in the table there, a pass grade overall. In order to get distinction overall, you need to get exceeding expectations in both of those assessment hurdles. If you get a combination of meets expectation and exceeds expectation in any variation of the two, then that will overall become a merit grade for you. So that's what will be awarded. So the final grading for this standard is obviously fail, which we don't want to consider. That we at least get a pass. Some may well get a merit, and some may score distinction overall. So those are the three variations that you can expect. Those certificates will be sent away for and claimed for by Marshall Assessment. They may well take 5 to 7 weeks to get to your training provider. And they'll go to there, or they'll go, in some cases, might go to directly to your employer to be passed out to you after that. So that's what you can expect in terms of grading overall, which really leaves me only one thing left to say, which is just for you well, best of luck, really, to hopefully you'll find the process kind of enjoyable. It gives you an opportunity definitely to show off and impress and share with your assessor exactly what you've learned and what you know. So the very best of luck for everybody, and all the best in your future scientific endeavours. Thank you.